Yeah, good morning, everybody. Jamie Wallace here with our Q&A Zoom meeting for lesson number 4. We're going to be looking at microclimates and our zone map. So it's all interesting stuff. We're getting beyond that initial site documentation, and now we're really going to dial into the importance of our site analysis and well, not just in part, but this is mainly why we're looking at microclimates and zones. So we want to know how the project site has currently been used, right? How the traffic patterns are on the site, and those will likely change with time. With your design, they'll likely change a little bit, but it's good to know at the beginning how your clients are utilizing the site. And again, that's all part of our site analysis. So what I think I'll do is share my screen here. We can take a quick peek at the assignment. There's some questions in the Q&A doc, and we'll get to those for sure. Yeah, Zoom has changed their layout here a little bit, so hopefully I keep pushing the right buttons. All right, so lesson number 4. Again, now that we have our base plan and our sector analysis done, so those are, really that sector map was these outside forces and how they can affect our project site. Now we're really sort of going into more of the micro. We're looking at the site itself. And microclimate is the first part of that. So if we look at the assignment here, there's a couple parts to it. One is we want to take our base plan and we're creating a new layer now. So if you have say a hand-drawn base map, you'll want to put some trace paper or vellum over that to create a new layer. And what we're going to do there is look at microclimates. And we want to make sure a few things. We want to make sure that we are allocating a microclimate to every part of the project site. So when you're all finished with your microclimate map, your whole project site should be covered with various microclimates. Now, you don't have to worry about any buildings, of course, but quite often the south, north, east, and west sides of any structure are going to create unique spots that we want to identify. And we'll look at a few examples today. There's some really good student examples from previous classes. So there's a few things we want to keep in mind with that. And the other thing is we want to have 5 existing plants identified, and preferably at least 1 tree and 1 shrub. That may not, there's a rare occasion where there's absolutely nothing on a project site, and as far as woody plants go. So if that's the case, not to worry, just go forward with annual or perennial plants or ground covers. But yeah, we want to get at least 1 tree and 1 shrub if we can. And then that'll be part of your microclimate map, identifying those 5 different plants. Now, one thing you don't have to worry about, let's say you had a large property and you had hundreds of Douglas firs on it, and you want to identify Douglas fir, you just have to identify 1 plant. You don't have to worry about marking every single one of them. So that's one thing to be aware of. If you were to identify all of them, it would be quite a busy little drawing. So yeah, not to worry about that. But it's really not so much the plants we're worried about, although that is part of it. When you typically start a project, and let's say you've got your base plan let's say you haven't completed it, let's say it's underway, you do want to identify existing significant plant material that's on your site. And we often will do that with trees and shrubs, maybe some vines if they're established. So those two groups of plants, the trees, the shrubs, we're really wanting to make sure those are on our base map. Even if we're not sure exactly what plant they are at this time, we'd want to make sure that they are there. They're either a deciduous tree or a conifer, and same with the shrubs. Maybe it's deciduous or evergreen, and the whole identification of that can come later, but as well as any decision on what one wants to do with that. So typically we'll document all those trees and shrubs, and then as the design unfolds, we'll start to consider whether we want to whether the plant has value and we want to leave it, whether it has value and we want to move it to a new location, or whether we're going to eliminate it. And those are tough decisions to go through. So that's something we're not really covering with the course here, but that's something that you will uncover yourself as you're designing for others. You're going to have to deal with some of these existing plants and whether they're an asset. They are a constraint often. You have to work around, but it's not a bad thing, and they can add a lot to a landscape, especially if you have some established material already. By adding some new plantings, you can get a really full looking garden pretty quick. So enough about that. With regards to the microclimates, we want to give them different attributes, right? So there's a few examples here. It might be open and sunny, right? Or open and hot. You may have shaded. Let's say you had a riparian area with a bunch of alder and it was a moist area. That's certainly going to be a shaded, moist understory. You may have some windy areas or exposed, or they may be sheltered. So there's a whole bunch of different ways we can articulate these different areas. And you can get, you don't want to get too dialed into this. So what I mean is, well, for instance, I think Embry was talking about his project site being 10 acres. So you can imagine if you were to really dial into a lot of that property, you may come up with just this, very, very complex microclimate map. So we do want to make sure we're not getting too high on that resolution scale, and just to stay fairly general. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple of examples for that. Get to the right page here. All right. So nice thing about the template files, we have examples built into them. So here's one here. And it's a small acreage, I believe. Yeah, three acres. So you can see there's a number of different microclimates that the student has identified. So there's some cool shaded areas, and they've also noticed that those are little areas that have frost pockets in them during the winter or shoulder season. We have a full sun area. We have a very dry, sandy, rocky area. And I wouldn't get, I mean, this person's gotten into the soils quite a bit here. I wouldn't be too concerned with that. You certainly can if you want to. It's not something that I would really be too concerned about. We're sort of looking at conditions above above the soil, so to speak, unless it is, of course, very wet. Uh-oh. There we go. Yeah, and then we have warm and dry. We have wooded, so that's obviously going to be cool. And that's a significant part of this. And then there's another wooded area that tends to be warmer and sunnier. And they have put in a note here that these are, rich and moist areas. So that's great information to have. There's 7 plants here. We only need to have 5. And there's another example right here. And you can see there's been a little more expansion on the different microclimates here. So sort of a dry slope, a dry clearing, exposed lawn areas, a muddy driveway, some moist edges, windy roadside, so shady canopy, wet woods, and a dark hedgerow, and dry woods on a ridge here. So these look good too, and I'm sure that everybody's going to have their own distinct descriptions, but this gives us a really good idea of what we are looking at, especially if we're not familiar with the project site itself. And here you go. So we want to consider temperature, solar access, and moisture. Okay. So is there anybody? Oh, I just didn't have my chat open. Sorry about that. All right. So Embry has a good question here. How many microclimates would be appropriate? Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I would say if your project site's fairly open, from what you've described just briefly before the call here, Embry, I would say, you may only have 5, right? You may have a few more than that. There's so many little factors involved here that it's really hard to say, but I let's see how many we've got here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if you're in between 5 and 10 somewhere. If you start going over 10, I would be cautious, because you'll end up like with this map or the other, it's fairly clear where our microclimates are. So when we start to apply design elements to this, and we're thinking, wow, I've got, let's say I want to have a lovely little warm patio that gets the morning sun. This makes it very easy to find that. Or you have, let's say you have some olives you want to plant, and you're on the West Coast here and you can get away with that. You may want to look at the west side of the house, west side wall or a south wall, and that sort of thing. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Emery. I think we'd be somewhere between 5 and 10, I think is great. All right. So does anybody have any other questions about the microclimates? What I'll do here is I'm just going to show you a picture that I opened up before the meeting here. And this is on the south side of where I live, in our house. And you can see that it's a little bit rough, the hardscape right now, but let me just get my pen out here. So this is south facing, this wall. It's completely south. We've been here 27 years, and we've gone through some very warm summers, and some of them have been pretty intense. So a few years ago, we put some raised beds in here, and we built a structure here that goes back and touches the house. So we have, it's not fully shown in this image, but we have these trellises going up. So we get foliage on top of this, and all the way along here. So that bottom floor, our bottom floor here is shaded during the summer months, and it's made a huge difference. So there's one of the advantages of identifying a microclimate that we can then take action in our design. So we know this is extremely hot, and we used to leverage that in regards to the plants that we had there. We had a eucalyptus, we had all these heat lovers, but this whole area has been renovated probably 6 times in the last 27 years. So yeah, this is the latest and hopefully the last. And we're going to be putting down some hardscape where there's gravel here. We're going to do some hard patio surface. I'm not sure what. But all of these raised beds are geared for that south-facing intense heat. And you can see some shading here from a tree that's right in the back corner. You can't see. We've got a lovely almond there, so that takes advantage of that microclimate as well. So that's just an example. If we walked around my house, we could look at all sorts of microclimates. And this space, the microclimate here against the house is quite different to, say, over here, where we have some shade from our almond tree. So we have an outdoor cooking area and some seating off the image here. You can't see where that is right now, but that again is a different microclimate that's much cooler and a pleasant place to be in the summer. In August, July, August, if you're sitting here, you wouldn't be happy. Be very, very hot. So that's just a little bit about some stuff off of our microclimates. And go back. Go. So yeah, there is this is all part of our site analysis. So for us to design not only with an ecological mind, but we want to design the best possible location, whether that be for entertainment, for growing food, for growing beautiful gardens. These microclimate maps play into that. They really help us, especially when you're starting out in the design field, right? So this is so important when we go to build the landscape, that we know where these areas are. If we're trying, for instance, if you had a client and they want to have a beautiful spot to sit around a landscape, around a garden, again, for say morning, warm sun to have their coffee, and you're not sure about the microclimates, you might not hit that one right. And certainly when we're looking at structure, so whether that be patios or fences or pergolas, we want to be sure changing those after the fact is not a good idea. We don't want to be having to make changes now. Changes in your soft landscape a lot easier. So, and that often happens because we'll create a garden, we'll create a bed, a planting area, we'll plant it and observe it, and over time we might, some things might do better than others, and we might modify it slightly based on that. But yeah, this is a really important first step. And again, that's part of our site analysis. This is a big difference between, in my opinion, between permaculture design and traditional landscape design is there's a huge emphasis on analyzing the site and working with it versus imposing our will on it. And I've done both. Earlier in my career, we certainly had to impose our will on a few sites. It worked, but it wasn't, I would never do it again. even though that was what our clients wanted to do at that time. It's just better to go with what assets you have there and deal with any of the liabilities that might be on your site. So yeah, can anybody think of any reasons other than that our microclimate map might be an important step in this process? And if you want, you can unmute yourself or type it in the chat. You have any thoughts about that? Okay, well, one thing I will throw out there. Jennifer's got an idea here as we consider eventual design elements. Yeah, you're quite right. So the more time we spend in our project site, the better feel we have for it. So, and believe it or not, my experience has been if I'm designing let's say my wife and myself are designing our own projects, our own site, right? Our own home site versus somebody else's. It's quite different. It's way harder when we're doing our own. Much easier when we're doing somebody else's, but you're quite right. When actually with Jennifer's comment there, when I'm putting together the base plan for somebody and we're out there measuring, we're starting to go through this process. And the first thing I'm looking at is water, is what can we do to increase efficiency of water use and infiltrate, whether it be off rooftops or off of driveways. So there's a lot of things that start going through my mind early in the process, but you're quite right. So we're looking at some of these elements that we might want to use. And Calvin, of plant selection, yeah, and that all plays into our microclimates as well. So we may be looking at a project site, and we're at the entrance to a house, and it's south facing and open, and our clients are saying this is way too hot. We can't go out here and enjoy it. We want this to be cooler. So there you go. It may be plant material that helps us cool that off. It also may be a structure, right? We may be able to design in a pergola. For ourselves, we were in a similar position, very hot little courtyard. We put in a covered cooking area that we can also double as a little gathering place. So we often have our family over here for barbecue in the summer, and we get about 10 or 12 people, and we can all sit in the shade and really enjoy it, even if it's a blazing hot day. So yeah, so good comments there. And Embry, reveal areas with strengths you did not already realize. Yes, exactly. So this again, we may be in this exercise just looking at these microclimates, but those are going to ripple out into our design ideas, and they might start creating some thoughts in that regards. But now here in this course with where we're at, we really don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but certainly thinking about some of those early design elements, such as our water, right? What are we going to do with that? That's such a big, it has such a big influence on all landscapes, regardless of where we are, that it really is, it's probably one of the hardest layers. I know for us, I'll kind of expand on this today, how our process, how it's, a regenerative approach. It's a little bit different protocol to what the course offers. It's similar but different. We're still looking at traffic patterns and flow through the site, and as well as water and where that accumulate. Some of the the common things that we see, especially in urban settings, is all that water off rooftops goes into storm drains and is taken away during the winter months, and then we're pumping it back in the summer. So how can we reduce that? It seems like most sites receive enough rain, receive enough water during the winter months. Why can't we utilize that better in the growing season? So things like rain gardens, things like active rainwater harvesting, where we're putting it into a cistern. Those are all really important things to have in the back of your mind. And we're gonna, when we get to week 5, or sorry, not week 5, lesson 5. It used to be week 5 because way back in the day, this was a 10-week program and that was it. There was no pro version. So but now we do have that, which is wonderful. But in lesson 5, we're going to be looking at water, and primarily what water influences your project site. And then we're going to start thinking about how we can best utilize that. What can we do with that? And in some ways, if we look at, I'm just going to go to another website here. Brad Lancaster has a, try again. There we go. If you go onto Brad's website, fabulous books. These are wonderful books, really. Even though he's in Tucson, Arizona, all of this is very much applicable to pretty much anywhere in the world. You do have to modify things a little bit, like on the west coast of North America. If we did a pit planting like this, and that's what this is called. So if we dug a pit and we put a tree in the middle, we might have some troubles here because our winters are so wet. But we could do this sort of thing and put the tree on the edge, right? So little modifications can be done to suit, but these books are fabulous. And I would, honestly, my goal with a lot of my work is to try and create landscapes that don't need any irrigation upon establishment. And for me, it's probably one of the hardest things to achieve, because I've come out of, I've been in the industry for about 40 years now, and in the early part of my career, first half of my career, we could do almost anything and you'd always have irrigation there to back you up. So if you've got a moisture loving plant, but it's in a dry climate, you can get around it. So this sort of approach, where you're basically feeding all of your stormwater and roof water into your landscape, it's just amazing. I'm really impressed with what he has done, and this is actually something I want to try and do here in our landscape, is some of these modified pit plantings, which you see in dry climates and not so much where we are on Vancouver Island. So yeah, this is very, very interesting to me. But enough of that. I can go on about that forever. So yeah, those are great comments, everyone. I totally agree. And it also is part of, the more time you spend in that landscape, the better your design is going to be. The greater the knowledge you're going to have of that site. And typically, you'll probably find, regardless of whether it's an acreage or a urban site, you're going to have to make repeated visits. And for everybody, that's going to be different. For myself, at this point in my career, I don't, 2 or 3 visits, I get a very good feel for the project. But for yourself, you might need to spend a little more time, right? But it is time well spent. And yeah, I can't say enough about the site analysis part of the design, really getting to know it. So that's that has a lot to do with our second portion of the assignment here, where we're getting into zones. So why are zones important? Well, how your client utilizes their site currently is very important. You want to get a good idea of how traffic flows primarily to and from the house, because that's known as zone 0. That's sort of the hub or the center of human activity. And I won't go through all these zones because you all know that, or you will know that going through the content. But one thing that's very interesting, and I don't know why I see this quite a bit, but often people will think they need to designate all the zones in their project site. And that might not be the case. If you're in an urban area, you may only have 3 zones. You may have zone 1, 2, and 3. Excuse me. So don't think you have to add all of them. You certainly don't. And this is a great resource here. I'm going to put it in the chat. It's an ebook that Andrew did years ago. He used to run an introduction to permaculture course as sort of a way for people to learn a little bit more about permaculture and be inspired to jump into the course here. And it's a great document. It's pretty basic, but it does have some really good definitions in it. And I find this very helpful. So the zone definition, there's some nice videos here you can look at. But if we go down to zone number 5, and this is something that I see people misinterpret quite often. So zone number 5 is an unmanaged wilderness area that requires no intervention. Okay, so that may look like this, depending on where your project site is. It may be a Douglas fir forest. Where I live, we're on 5 acres here. We've got probably 1.5 acres of zone 5. And we walk through it, but we don't manage it. If a tree comes down, I like leaving some woody material within the forest, because that's how nutrients cycle and soil builds in the forest. But sometimes we will take the odd tree that has fallen for firewood, but other than that, we're not managing it at all. So that's what you want to keep in the back of your mind when we're looking at zone number 5. And again, you may not have that on your project site at all. Let's just see a couple examples here. So I'll probably, after looking at that definition and you look at the student's zone 5, that may actually not really be a zone 5. But we don't want to be splitting hairs over definitions. It's just, it is an untouched area, but it may not be a wilderness area if it's a steep slope in sort of these typical developments. So in this case, we have all 5 zones. In this urban space, we have 4, and a lot of urban spaces all C3. And here they have designated the house as 0. You can do that if you want. That's totally up to you. But again, that is the center of the human activity on the site. And if we look at Bill Mollison's permaculture design manual, he talks about a 10-foot band. I think it's approximately 10-foot band around a house as being zone 1. And that might be the case. It's not the case where I live. We do not have a zone 1 on every outside wall of our house. We actually have zone 1 on our south side and the west side of our house, but not the east, and certainly not the north. So although that's kind of a general rule, it's not really what gets applied to every single project site. So this is a pretty straightforward exercise to go through. Believe it or not, we don't typically do zone maps within our design package, but this is really good information to document. And, you may find if you carry on after the course and you're designing for others, you may find that in time, you don't need to document this. But I would say at this stage, it's a really good idea to be analyzing your project site, as deeply as you can. And this is part of it. How is it used? And that really does help with making decisions on, where things go. And it's quite possible that at the end of the design, that this has changed a bit. So this is your existing zone map that you're going to carry forward into those final design assignments, and see if that has changed at all. And it probably will, but that's not the objective. Unless, let's say, in an urban setting like this, we're identifying a bunch of areas that are just not utilized, right? And you may find, I really want to expand the use of the space because it is an urban setting, and we want to get as much production and enjoyment from this. So that could certainly be one of the outcomes there. And this is one way of identifying that. You may find that parts of the landscape just are completely underused. If we look at this example, again, they've used zone 0. And then zone 1, you can see is, now this is 3 acres, but there's zone 1. It's just this little spot here, right? So that's very interesting. It does not cover the rest of the house. Now that's you could say that's one slight error in this assignment, is we're supposed to be covering all of the spaces. So this slope here, the whole slope should have some sort of microclimate to it. Yeah, but you can see how different they are. So there's lots of space on this property that's zone 3 or 4, right? So the hub of activity is quite close to the house. And I'd say that's, very, very typical. And it may be something that you identify. One kind of funny note, we had a project that was 3 acres, and we had a client, let's say the house was here and the entry off the road was here. So house very close to the road, and they had a chicken coop. They had chickens, which was great. Love chickens. But their chicken coop was over here. It was hundreds of feet away from the house. So we know we have chickens. We know we go visit them 3 times a day, every day. Now you could reduce that to 2, but you have to at least go there twice a day. And this is where if you're hoping to place chickens, chicken coop on your project site, you'd want to avoid making it hard on somebody, right? You don't want them to be hiking all the way down there. If they want to go for a walk and exercise, that's great. But if you have to in the middle of winter, a shorter trip is good. So often with things like chicken coops, you'll find them right at the edge of zone 1 and 2. So they're fairly close. We usually have good visuals, like with where our chicken coop is a zone 2. And I can just turn right now and look out. I can see them, see if they're doing okay, see if there's any predator pressure. So again, this is the value of knowing the zones on your project site. That's just one example. Another might be, you want to have a clothesline to dry your clothes. Something we do, and it's in our zone 1. We just have to walk a few steps with the laundry and boom, we're there. And then we actually have indoor clotheslines during the winter months because I have a real aversion to dryers. I don't think they're very good for clothing, and there's certainly huge energy users. So yeah, so that's a little bit about zones here and microclimates. Yeah, and the biggie, of course, again, is this definition. So feel free to download that link if you want to take a peek at it and just have a snapshot of what each zone, the expectation is on those. Good picture of Andrew. That's not his house, but wow, what a beautiful, beautiful work on the front of that house. That's amazing. All right, so we have taking a look at our zone map and microclimate map, and there's some resources here. And that's probably the biggest challenge most people will have is plant identification. And there's some good apps for that for your phone. And when I started working in the landscape industry 40 years ago, there were no smartphones, or I don't think there were even cell phones then. So I spent probably a decade focused on learning my plants through books. So I was just buying books as much as I could. And yeah, it's a long-term journey knowing your plants. So that takes quite a while. So just realize, be patient with yourself that way. And it's a long-term thing. It's a very deep rabbit hole to go down. And again, it took me at least a decade, and I'm still learning new stuff every day, but it's not as quite as intense. When I was young and single, I could work all day and come home and just study all night. That was great. I was happy doing that. Don't have that sort of freedom of time anymore, but yeah, that'll be the big one is learning plants. So if there are some good books you can get, but there's so much stuff online now that I would say, the need for books has been reduced quite a bit. Then of course we have our rubric, so we want to make sure we look at that. I use this when I'm grading your assignments. So if you have included everything on here and done your best, odds are you're going to get full marks for it. I'm certainly not a stickler for grading. I don't, whether you get an A or a B in the course, I don't think it has any bearing on anything other than, it's nice to just do your best, but it's it's the takeaway from the course, learning the design system, being able to reference back to the online program whenever you want to catch any, to catch up on anything that you want. And certainly for me, this has been a really, it's been a life-changing thing in terms of how we design. What you may find, if you're interested in larger agricultural settings, after the course, the Agrarian platform is an amazing educational hub. There's online training it's ongoing with that. And that's, that they use 10 different distinct layers to design agricultural systems. So it's extremely interesting. And another thing here is Javan Bernakovich, one of our instructors here, has this fantastic website. It's called regenerativeliving.online. So if you haven't checked it out, I would encourage you to look at that. There's some really good courses here. And yes, I did a course in the spring with Javan. It was a lot of fun. But Jude Hobbs, I took this hedgerow course, the Coppice agroforestry course. I took the composting toilet course. Oh, there we go. My wife took the family food security course. So there are lots of really good programs in here. I also took the propagating woody edibles. I try and take a course every year through Javan. And so there's some new ones coming up on syntropic agroforestry and food forests and soils. So, beyond this program, there are lots of opportunities to keep learning. And yeah, I know for some of you, you'll really want to keep diving down those wormholes, but we won't get too distracted at this time. What maybe I will do now, we'll just stop that share and just show you a couple examples of some of the deliverables that we provide our clients here. And you'll see it's a little bit different than, yeah, we've got a few minutes left here. All right. So this is an urban project we did, I think it was last year. And I'm not really going to talk about the project so much as just this is the deliverables we provide our clients. And we can look at a few things today. But probably every Q&A, I'll go through one design or another. And I'm not suggesting anything. I'm not saying this is what you should try and replicate or do yourself. It's just that this is what we do. And I think there's a lot of benefit just seeing what other designers do. And in terms of not only that creative end of it, but the graphical end, like how they get their ideas across, because the ideas are one thing and articulating that graphically and showing that to your client is sort of another thing altogether, right? So we start out with a base plan and a sector analysis, just like you have. And this one was pretty simple here. We have privacy and flood and wind and our winter and summer sun. And then we have a little explanation. We have a little explanation down below here for our clients, because you may find this as well. With a lot of our clients, this is a whole learning process for them. They want an ecological landscape. They just don't know the ins and outs of it. So we take them through the process. We will we'll put this together, and then we'll have a meeting and we'll go over it. We'll usually do a Zoom meeting with them, go over their sector compass or sector map and say, here, this is our starting point, and see if they agree. They may say, oh, well, yeah, in this case, actually, the privacy sector got expanded a bit from what we had. And then as we're designing, we're looking back on this and as a reference, right? And making sure that we're covering off some of these outside forces that we're hoping to utilize. So that is our first step. And then let's take a look at our water layer here. So this is the first design layer that we do, and we call this water. So we have our base plan, and then we have a few things that we've documented. So this mauve polygon that's here, this is we put this in because we want to ensure that we are not infiltrating any rainwater into the ground inside this 10-foot box. So our client's home is right here. And then we draw an outline 10 feet off of the house. So as we're going through our ideas for the water layer, we make sure we're not sticking anything within this, because we know that would just create some challenges, right? If we're infiltrating water next to the house, we are just going to be loading up the perimeter drainage. So we'd rather not do that. We want to infiltrate water into the soil so it benefits the landscape and it's not causing any issues with the house perimeter. And in this particular case, these people had an asphalt shingled roof. So when that happens, and that's most of the time in an urban area, we know that we can't collect water and put it in a cistern and apply it to an edible landscape. It's just not a good practice. The reason for that is the shingles have fire retardants and hydrocarbons and all sorts of other products that we don't want to introduce into our annual vegetables, because of the tissues of those plants they'll have a tendency to intake those compounds. So you don't really want to be eating that. There is evidence supporting that type of rainwater could be applied to woody edibles. So, shrubs like raspberries, blueberries, fruit trees. There's evidence that says you can do that. I would just be, I err on the side of caution with that. So in an urban setting, our number one goal is infiltration, and that's often via a rain garden. And in this case, we have a rain garden out front that looks like two rain gardens, right? It's actually one. It is connected here, and we'd have to look at other design layers we knew we had to provide some access to the front of the house. So we chose to divide this feature up and allow a pathway to go down the middle of it, basically. And it's very interesting because right here, this outline on the base map, this is just a monstrous concrete pad. This used to have commercial activities here. So there was a requirement for on-site parking. But the new owners, they want to get rid of all this concrete and try and regenerate that land beneath the concrete. So this one good way of recharging the water. And the same thing in the back here. We are doing a small rain garden. And you can see we've got contours. So we know water is flowing this way. And out front, it's very flat, but we know water is going to flow that way as well. So that is, let me see, I got a couple of minutes left. I will just show you the access. So we go through this, our first layer. We identify these roof areas, and we're going to be doing this in lesson 5. But we show a picture of a rain garden and what it's all about here. And then we present this. And again, our clients, you know, they don't have to provide feedback, but they're seeing how the design's being put together piece by piece. And then we go to the next step where we're looking at access, how we're moving through the site. And you can see we've got got a pathway here going to the front entrance. We have an auxiliary, you know, sort of a less traveled route to go down the side here. We have on-site parking right here and right here. So there are places to park that are within the property boundaries. And then there's an outdoor south-facing area here. There's a pergola here to provide shade. And there's a studio and a tool shed and, and again, parking outside. So this is sort of step 1 and 2 of our work there. And you'll also see we do this part of our software. We put in revision notes. So we put a date as to when that was done. And then if there's a revision, we'll date that as well. So I think I'll probably stop where I am. We can look at this in our next Q&A, and I have made a little boo-boo here. So I've been a little bit distracted and not looked at the Q&A doc. So let's take a quick peek at that. Sorry about that. All right. So there was a couple of questions here. Kelvin had a question. I think he's on the call today. And I do think we have answered that. Yes. So, okay. If we are looking at areas that are irrigated, yeah, that's not really something we want to include with the microclimate, because that's not, if we withhold water, that changes everything, right? So I would ignore the sprinkler system. If it's creating some dampness or a wet area, yeah, let's not worry about that. When we're assessing, we really want to assess what is currently going on outside of, the water support. We'll say that. So I hope that makes sense, Kelvin. Let's see here. Then we have, now this may be a question that gets answered over a couple of weeks here. Brian had this question on his last assignment, and I thought I would put it in the Q&A here because it's very interesting. And why is it interesting? Well, Brian's project site was 5 acres, and I believe it was recently logged. And there's a house, and his clients live there. So now what's happening is there's been a response on the landscape. So when you remove all the forest, that's obviously making a big change to the landscape. And now you have no tree canopy. There's a tremendous amount of water held in the soils with trees, so that all basically dumps and empties. And I think what Brian is finding is that he's getting invasives coming onto the scene, and and managing that is not easy. And I can concur with that. If you don't have some sort of a plan in place to manage a spot like that, it's really going to take on a life of its own. Now, part of it, the strategy really depends on what one wants to do with the space. So if it has been cleared of trees, to answer Brian's question, really, what is the goal? Is the goal to take all the stumps out and have a 5-acre pasture? Is the goal to replant and reestablish a forest there? So you can see those are sort of opposite ends of what one could do, and there'd be all sorts of ideas in the middle. You could put in a food forest. You could replant it with different types of trees rather than native. So again, the answer to that question would be based on what the client's goals are. And this is something that you would probably be dialing into initially with a site visit before you even start. If we, and this has happened, if you end up going to a project site and there's been a lot of tree removal, you want to find out from your clients or prospective client, what's their goal here? Why have they done this? And not in a judgmental way, but okay, you've taken all these trees out. What's the end goal? And we had a 10-acre site that was like that. The clients had removed most of the trees, and they're almost old growth too. They were very, and then they took a bulldozer in and flattened it, and the whole site was compacted. So it was, they didn't realize what they had done, and they really set back the property. But we came up with a plan for them, and they wanted to have animals on the land. So that's easy, right? So if you're, now I say it's easy, but at least we have a goal, so that we're not trying to replant trees. We're trying to hold the soils in a certain place, in a succession that would support pasture. So we're going to get into that in lesson 6 when we dive into soils and soil succession, because that really does play into what will grow well on a given piece of property. It really does depend on what organisms inhabit the soil, what the soil life is like. So it's a very interesting rabbit hole to go down. So maybe what I'll do is we'll pick this up in our next Q&A as well, and dive into that a little bit deeper. But I would say the next one, we're going to really dial into water, and it's traditionally a hard assignment for a lot of people, but we'll do all our, we'll do everything we can here to make it as easy as possible. Yeah, so does anybody have any questions they'd like answered today? I don't see any other ones in the chat here. Don't want to keep anybody on the call longer than they have to. I don't see any questions, so maybe what we'll do is we'll just wrap up today's meeting. And thank you very much, everyone, for being part of this. And yeah, if you have any questions at all through the week, or you get into a little bit of a, you get stuck with anything, don't hesitate to drop me a note. and happy to help you out. And then with lesson 5, we'll go through a good meeting with that, and I will show you how I would approach lesson 5 and give you lots of support there. So yeah, so thank you very much again, everybody. And I hope you have yourself a great week. I'm looking forward to seeing your work next Monday. And yeah, you have a wonderful week, and take care. And thanks again.